Hello and welcome. My name is Alistair Watts and I'm here representing PMCG, Policy and Management Consulting Group, and you're listening to our inaugural episode of Podcasting Progress, a series that gives you a closer look at PMCG's work, people, and areas of expertise and interest. Today, against the backdrop of the Asian Development Bank's 57th annual meeting here in Tbilisi, we're joined by Atze Verkennis, Associate Partner and Senior Director and Global Practice Leader for Regional and Urban Development at Ecorys, a world-class research-based consultancy. Now, Atze has more than 30 years of impressive global experience in regional and local economic development, EU structural funds policy, project cycle management, and policy evaluations. As well as his native Netherlands, he has worked in dozens of countries all across Europe, Asia, and Africa, including projects on the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, Deltaplan in Bangladesh, and a social policy project in Ethiopia. Without further ado, we'll move on to some questions. Atze, a very warm welcome to Tbilisi, and not your first time, as I've gathered, far from it. So, Atze, before we delve into the here and now, I'd like to learn a bit more about you and your past expertise, your decades of rich experience that you've accumulated. So, what can you tell me are some of your proudest achievements to date?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm very honored to be the first guest in, I hope, a long series of podcasts. Over 30 years of experience. Started out as a civil servant in more like spatial planning, but as an economist by trade, I was more focusing on the economic side. And then that was in the days that the Iron Curtain fell. And so all of a sudden, interest moved away from purely Western Europe, Southern Europe, to Eastern Europe. And as a company, we moved along with that. So, and then you take a first step, and then, there is a next step. And so things develop. So a long time been working, still on the domestic market, but also a lot of projects, majority, I think, for the European Commission, helping, assisting countries that want to join the European Union, are in the process of joining. So notably the latest years in the Balkans, and then what they call the neighborhood, Eastern neighborhood countries, and Georgia, Armenia, Moldova, etc. I think one of the, and then I refer to projects that we did here in the region. One of the most successful projects we did was a project called Measures for Economic Growth, where we assisted local authorities in the 6 neighborhood countries. I mean, Belarus is now dropped out, obviously, but then we're still 6, in setting up local economic development plans. And we ran the project here from Tbilisi. PMCG was a partner of ours. And that's the Commission itself said that was one of their flagship projects. We're still very happy that we were part of that and could turn it into a success. If you ask me what I like most, actually, again, referring to a situation in this region, what type of projects, one of the things I like most to do is in a project we did in Armenia, which is in the mountainous areas, where they have small villages where the women and the children live there and the men are all in Russia to earn their money. You can hardly grow anything there, and sheep can survive. So what we actually did, they had some sheep in this village, but with poor quality of wool. So from the project we bought 4 other sheep, and then crossbred, and you get a better quality of wool. And in the end, 20 women in this village found a job and an income through this crossbreeding and manufacturing of wool. And those are, it's small scale, but in a community so high up in the mountains and so poor, actually, it was wonderful to see how these women in the village were so happy that they had, useful income, and that's something that they really do something with. And that for me is more important than all kinds of, high-level policy documents and that sort of thing. Although it pays the bread, but.
Well, that's fantastic. A great example there of something that clearly must have changed lives, drastically.
Yeah.
Something they maybe would never have thought about before. So that's a fantastic example. I'm sure there are many others. Touching upon that slightly, maybe that Armenia project, I don't know how current that was, but if you could tell us a little about your current projects, how these are progressing, and what you expect to be gained from them.
Yeah, to be honest, projects here in the region at the moment I'm not involved in.
Not necessarily.
No. And also I'm officially retired, but I still work for the company because, it keeps me busy and I like it. And doing nice projects with nice people is something that I like to do.
Still have a lot of knowledge to
yeah, and the seniority comes in handy these days because there's a big demand for it. So actually now I'm basically focusing on two areas. One, this is more on the domestic market, more in rural development, and not so much economic, but also more in biodiversity, water. Everything to do with, policies that help to improve that. And of course, this touches upon agriculture because there's sometimes quite some tension between, what is good for biodiversity and what farmers want or can do.
Of course.
And on the other hand, I'm still working on local economic development, but also more towards the, let's say, more sustainable type of projects. So one of the projects I'm active in now is a project we do for one of the European agencies. And it's a project on energy communities throughout the European Union and a few other countries, which is about, in most countries you have on the local level these communities, local actors that one way or the other try to stimulate or implement renewable energy projects. And the question in this case is, how is this more or less like dispersed over Europe? What can you learn from each other?
Mm-hmm.
So how do they approach this in Belgium, and how do they approach it in the Czech Republic, and what are the obstacles, and etc. So that's a project that I'm working on now, which I like very much. Another one, which I hope we will win, it's not sure yet, but I think we have a good chance, is on the relationship between digitalization and regional disparities, also in Europe, so also a European project. So these are some of the projects that I'm involved with now, and they all more, when you compare it to like 10, 15 years ago, they will have more that a really sustainable character, let's say, or focus on sustainability.
Well, you've mentioned that word there, sustainability, and local economic development, and balancing these interests of these economic interests with these environmental concerns, which is an ongoing struggle. And on that note, I want to talk a little bit about, or I want you to inform us about the circular economy. So the circular economy is an increasingly hot topic in today's business world. Have you observed any notable changes in the concept's implementation over the course of your career? It's been around for, an arguable amount of time, a few decades, maybe longer.
Yeah, well, when it really started to get any real attention, let's put it like that, I think we're talking about 10 to 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was still a lot of talk and some theoretical concepts that were not easy to implement. And to be very honest, we are still hardly, I would say, in the stage of really implementing circular economic projects. There are some examples of usually startup companies that have this circular concept and try to be completely circular, but they are sometimes struggling. They're front runners, but front runners always run into the problems also as the first group. And actually, it is since a few years that there is a more like structural attention for circular economy. It's also not so strange because it is very closely related to the whole energy transition, because of course being circular means you can't use any fossil energy, that sort of thing. And in order to achieve that, you have to go through this energy transition. So that came up first, and circular economy is following. But now I see that the attention, at least policy-wise, is more into, okay, how do we get it really started? I mean, the small startups is all very nice and necessary, but the big gains will be with the large industrial companies. And that's not easy. It's not that the companies don't want it. They do, but it is very, very expensive. And they usually can't do that on their own. So they need the public sector to step in. For instance, when you talk about energy, the heavy industries, the region what I'm talking about now, which is the Amsterdam port region, there's a huge steel plant which absorbs most of the energy and absorbs most of the raw materials, let's say, going through the area, and which is working on coal and gas. Well, they want to get rid of that, and then the only viable alternative is hydrogen. But that means you have to build a hydrogen plant, and it costs billions. And so you have this ongoing discussion, okay, who's going to do what? And, very important, that these companies also say, well, sure, we're willing to invest. But if we are going to invest now, we want to be sure that our investment will pay off in 10, 15 years, and that not after 2 or 3 years there will be a new policy, and now we have to change things again. That is a
So there's an
tricky balance.
There's a lack of trust in some extent.
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. There's a lack of trust in the, let's say, continuity of policies.
Okay, yes.
And that's really something that has to be overcome. And I mean, circular economy, an economy can only be circular when the private sector embraces it and does it. It's not something that the authorities, that the government can do. They are not a real player in this. They don't produce anything.
So it's all hands on deck.
Right. Yeah, and it's of course a long-term process. It's not something that you do overnight. It's the most projects that we do now on this subject and on what regions should do in order to make this whole transition towards a more circular economy. We're talking about a time horizon of 2050. And even then, it's sometimes, I think, quite optimistic. Even if you could achieve 100% circularity, which I don't really think, but okay. It will take a long time, yeah. And we're still in the first steps.
So patience is required, and it's not a widespread human quality, usually.
No.
Especially on businesses. Kind of looking back a little bit further, but thanks for that, Atze. Should, in your opinion, whether this is worth delving into, but should businesses and nations have embraced the concept of the circular economy a little bit earlier than they did?
Yeah, with hindsight, yes, of course. But it's also, of course, the question in what stage of development is a certain country or a certain region, like EU or within EU. It's so of course the more like Western world is further into that, also in terms of conceptualization. It also comes, of course, I think the idea originated from a German guy, I think. I'm not sure anymore. But then, because everything connects to everything, because you're talking about raw materials being, in the end, turned into, smartphones or you name it. It's a worldwide chain. So you have to go through the whole world. And if part of the chain, which isn't as far as the West is not ready for that, it's very difficult to make them ready. And so maybe in the West we could have started a bit earlier. But then again, if at that time we would be able to get these other geopolitical blocks with us, I doubt it very much. And even now, of course. I mean, it's completely different, but I mean, countries like Russia will never go this path, at least not with the present regime.
Yes.
So yeah, there are large differences on a global level.
Absolutely, a lot of interest to be served. Do you think that can having a circular economy, if we want to can establish this, do you think that could still spare us from the worst effects of climate change, like specifically on the environmental side of things?
Yeah, it will help. And every little bit helps. So, I mean, you should do that as well. As I said before, it starts actually with the energy transition. And the energy transition is more important when you talk about climate change. Circular economy is, of course, going away from fossil, but actually you're talking then about energy transition. But it's about, depletion of raw materials, which you don't want, actually. So in that sense, it makes sense to reuse as much as possible the materials that we have. And maybe we now have them in a different form, but you can always bring them back to their original form, recycling, or use it in new products, remanufacturing, that sort of thing. It is not the answer to the climate change problem, but it helps.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. As well as covering many developed countries that you've mentioned, including Netherlands, of course, you've worked in some of the world's more deprived or less developed nations, if we can put it that way. What sort of approach have you found to succeed in those contexts that are maybe, you're out of your comfort zone from the West? I mean, how do you approach those situations and succeed there?
Yeah. I think most important is that you adjust to the way these people think and live their lives, and how they deal with what falls across them or whatever. The Armenian example with the sheep. They know they want something with wool, and what do you need? Then you need sheep, and so invest in sheep. But don't tell them that they should invest in a cluster of wool activities and whatever, which is, I'm afraid, some consultancies still do. So keep it simple, keep it understandable, and then you get these people along. But if you're going to tell about all kinds of highly academic approaches and that sort of thing, they will, not politely, but it will not land. I also mentioned this Mayors for Economic Growth project that we did, which we finalized in 2020, end of 2020. It was taken over by the United Nations Development Program, so that it is EU money, and they decided that UN should continue with it. They made this mistake. So where we did very practical local economic development plans that, would fit into the local community, people could understand what they were doing. So projects for improving small marketplaces. UN was going to talk about all kinds of high-tech approaches and whatever that these people just don't believe in. And now it is, more or less bled to death, this whole initiative.
So you think for that situation and others like it, the continuity of kind of ownership that the initial idea and the beneficiaries that were on board initially, I think continuity is important, and having a kind of consistent voice.
Yes, and take it a step at a time. A lot of small steps also make a large step, but don't try to make the large step in one go, because you'll lose them, and then it's also a waste of money, a waste of time. So,
nobody wants that.
No.
Okay, and are there any particular regions or countries that you find to be lagging behind when it comes to the circular economy?
I was just talking about more on the global level. As I said, the concept is very much from the Western world. European community, US, by the way, as well, even though a lot of people think that they're still high capitalists, whatever, but there's a lot of groups and also companies actually that are going circular in the US. I can't speak for all countries. When I speak about the European community, within the European community, it's the picture is that I think Western European countries and Northern European countries, they are the front runners, especially the Northern European countries, by the way. And South and East are lagging behind a bit. You see that with more subjects, by the way, more topics. For the South, it's usually more like a cultural thing. They are more interested in other things. And the East is because, history, they still have to catch up. And they're still in the process of catching up. So for them, it would be a huge step now to do the same as what we try to do in the West. But as I said, small steps is also works.
So you're looking at generations, several generations for some of these areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I'm talking about 2050 for the Netherlands, and even then we're not finished. You're talking about 2080, 2100 for some of the other countries, I think. Yeah,
very much the long game.
Yeah, it's a long game. I mean, companies have to change their whole production process, sometimes their products. You don't do that from one day till the other, and there will be a long period where you have partly, a development for more circular, but still have your old process being linear. And they will gradually then intersect, and then linear will go down and circular will go up. But that takes a long time to achieve that, because there is not a company that can afford to say, okay, now we stop producing and we take 3 years to change our whole process, and then we start. You can't. So you have to do it parallel.
With a bit of patience again, yeah.
Right.
And we talked about this a little bit earlier, off camera, off mic. But I mean, how have the recent global shocks of the pandemic and also the heightened geopolitical tensions in various regions, have they complicated your work in any way, or maybe not now, or over the years of these things that you?
Yeah, I'm not talking now specifically about circular economy, but more about the work in the consultancy business, international consultancy business. Obviously, it started with a pandemic, and all of a sudden you can't travel anymore. What I do know is in a lot of these countries, and certainly also in the Balkans, but also in Asia, face-to-face is still very important. So you can do a lot via Zoom and Teams, and for certain meetings, it's perfect. But sometimes it's also good to, have a coffee or a beer with somebody, and not in the office, but outside the office, and that you miss. So it makes the work, in that sense, the work more difficult.
More formal? Is that, or losing that informal?
Well, less personal. Let's put it like that.
Okay, yeah.
And it's much more difficult to establish a relationship and discuss some things, that are better discussed in private than in meetings. And I mean, in especially in the Balkans, but actually I've said it here and in Armenia as well. I mean, in Armenia, I did a project working directly with one of the ministers. And when we had to discuss something more sensitive, we'd go out and have a coffee. That would not be discussed in his office. And I have the same experience in Albania or in Macedonia. So that's the way how they deal with that in those countries. And in Albania, you don't do anything without a cup of coffee. And most of these coffee shops, they exist on the public and private sector, meeting each other in the coffee place, and not officially. Yeah, of course they meet officially in an office, but nothing happens there. It happens in the cafes. So that is one aspect. Of course, a lot of international projects were delayed or they were not tendered. So from a commercial perspective, it was a difficult few years because we didn't get any new project because there just weren't any new projects. And then, of course, the whole situation in Ukraine and now also in Gaza, by the way. We also work in Palestine, and obviously not now at the moment. So that is a clear example. We used to do a lot of work in Ukraine. We still do some work in Ukraine, but it is more from a distance. So it's also not the ideal situation. But at least there things are, that's what I see at least from World Bank and the European Commission. They keep trying to, keep the people there also busy. And some of these projects, that they will not result in the result that was actually put on paper. But some of the Commission officials are very open about that. It keeps the people in Ukraine busy. It gives them work, it gives them a job. And that's also important. So, but it's not the way you used to work previously.
So you're coming to some kind of compromise or some sort of, diluted, ambitions to some of these things.
Yeah. It's like we do now. We run a large project focusing on SMEs in Ukraine. But a lot of these SMEs, their turnover is down by 80%. So, what can you do as Commission? But they try, to keep them a bit positive, and that's by coincidence. My wife is half Russian and half Ukrainian, and we have now 2 relatives of hers staying with us because, for obvious reasons. But her husband is not allowed to leave. He had a very well functioning print company. His turnover is down by 90%. And 90. I mean, so what do? Your personnel, at least part of it, is to go to the army, and so sometimes he still has some work to do, but so it's completely different from the way it used to be.
Enormously challenging.
It is, yeah.
So if we're just reverting back to your time in Tbilisi at the moment and the ongoing ADB annual meeting. A lot of people flooding in from all over the world. What's the general outlook been among your fellow attendees? Is there optimism about the future of economies, or is there hesitancy or pessimism, or what kind of vibe are you?
Well, of course, I was not able to attend all the meetings because there are too many. But the ones I did attend, I think in general, my conclusion is that, let's say, the people with ADB, the people with the governments, let's say the authority civil servants, they are actually rather optimistic. The more pessimistic messages came from the CSOs, who said, we have all these huge energy projects, but you don't pay any attention to what this means for local population, and it can be dangerous. And does it have the impact that we need, or we don't need it at all? And ADB should not finance that, and so it is a bit of that. So the people with the money, they're very optimistic, and the people with other problems, not that much.
That sounds familiar. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And looking ahead slightly more generally, I mean, what prospects and opportunities do you see for the circular economy in the coming years? You've covered this to some extent so far, but if you can kind of give us an upsum, that would be lovely.
Yeah, as I said, I think that there is no way back. Let's put it like that. It will just happen. The main question is, how fast will it go? And we also did some scenario analysis on that, and because it also depends on a lot of factors that you can't influence yourself, either as a company or as a regional authority or whatever. So obviously, if international trade goes down, that's not helpful, because it will mean less money to invest, and companies will be less willing to go through such a difficult transition because they just have a different idea about the future. But in the long run, it will happen. And in the long run, for some regions, it will also be profitable. This afternoon in the session where I was a member of the panel, I also said we had a specific look at port regions. So in this case, Rotterdam and Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where you will see the change in say, economic activities from transporting goods, moving goods from the port to either Germany or from Germany to US or whatever. That in a more circular economy, you will also have these flows going back. So not the finished product going into Germany, but the waste or, what you don't use anymore, but still can use in different forms, will go back to the port area. But why transport it all the way to US? So these port areas will probably be the best locations to pick up the manufacturing part. So using old materials, old products, turning them into new products, refurbishing or whatever. There are various options. And that means that you're starting to add value in a port rather than just, take goods from a boat and put them on another boat and ship them and move them further. So for those regions, it can be profitable. Then there will also be regions where it will be less profitable. But on the whole, I think it is the way to go. But do it again, step by step. Don't try to push it, because then companies will just say, okay, back off. And it will take a long time.
Atze, thank you very, very much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Okay, thank you.
You can subscribe to the Podcasting Progress podcast on Spotify, on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also keep up to date on future episodes, of which we hope there will be several, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and also on PMCG's website.